Okay, here we go. Well, welcome everyone. I had an episode come to mind today I think it's a good way of beginning to address the human condition of separation, and that condition has been accepted as the status quo or the normal. Private minds, individuals, private thoughts, and going for glimpses or temporary glimmers of intimacy and connection when the whole condition of time-space is basically one of separation, division, isolation, loneliness, because of the way it's set up. So most people find themselves spending their seeming lifetime dealing with issues around loneliness and isolation, difficulties with communication. A lot of times you'll hear two people talking and one will say, I'm hearing your words, but I don't understand what you're talking about. There's not a meeting of the minds, and even words, which are the attempt to be connected and feel that connection and intimacy, they usually fall very short. And what Jesus is saying in the Course is he's describing the condition. Even words are symbols of symbols twice removed from reality. So they're very crude tools to try to make that connection. Although through Scripture and through devoted prayer and through really a strong focus on show me the way, lead me, then the words are used in a very helpful way too, and we call that guidance. So what's pushed out of awareness, though, is this sense of private minds and private thoughts. That's pushed out of awareness, so it's basically unconscious. And then when you interact with people, it just seems to be the status quo of trying to make a connection, have the best connection possible, have the closest connection possible, and that seems like a great feat in this world is to have that connection. And what we're seeing is that no two people see the same world, because no two people are perceiving the world in the same way. So let's say we have 7.8 billion people on the planet, and you have basically 7.8 individual perspectives. And then you start to understand why everything is difficult. Relationships seem difficult, groups seem difficult, government seems difficult, countries seem like a difficult thing. They're so volatile because you don't have a single perspective, and only a single perspective is there unity, harmony, peace. So in Christian terms, with the Trinity, the Holy Spirit's perspective, we'll say, is what healing is. It's coming to a shared perspective. In fact, the Holy Spirit's perspective is the only perspective that can be shared. Everything else is the attempt to share something that basically was set up not to be shared. The ego did not set up anything with the goal of sharing. Its goal is death. Its goal is isolation. Its goal is loneliness. So much loneliness and guilt and fear and despair that it will counsel people from time to time to just kill themselves, to try to put themselves out of their misery. And it will use death as an option, like say, just get it over with, just end it. This is just an unsolvable equation. And then Jesus says, well, even that is not a solution, because he says the ego will pursue you beyond the grave. In other words, death is no relief or no solution either. It's just another setup in a game of setups. The whole world is set up. So I thought I would show this episode because this is a a Star Trek Next Generation episode in which we have a female doctor on board. Her name is Crusher, Dr. Crusher, and it's one of those rare Star Trek situations where there's a family member. She does have a son who's on the same ship, so it's Dr. Crusher and her son Wesley are family members. But there's going to be this kind of strange thing that happens to the ship, and an anomaly. I think most people who watch Star Trek Next Generations, they see Dr. Crusher. She's pretty even keel. She's pretty sensible. She seems very, what people might say, level-headed and pretty consistent. But we're going to see an episode here where she's going to be pushed beyond the limits of all of that into a state of fear, and it's more the fear of facing one's own thoughts. If you think about the unconscious mind, the reason that there is an unconscious mind is because certain memories and thoughts are too horrifying to be kept in awareness, and that's where the unconscious comes in. It's like a dumping ground for thoughts, memories, traumas that are absolutely too horrifying for the mind to engage with, so they're just pushed out of awareness. And pushing them out of awareness is as if they don't exist, even though they're still there, and they do come up from time to time, and that's why people turn to all types of spirituality, psychology, and many different means to try to handle the darkness. And we learn from Jesus in A Course in Miracles that you have to bring the darkness to the light. So it's going to come up anyway. It's going to come up sooner or later. But if you can do it in a way where it seems guided and more systematic, then that takes away the terror, because you get a little piece, little chunks at a time, and then you let them come up, and then you deal with them. They've done studies in psychology of they'll list like the top 20 or 25 stressful events, and so even psychologists will pair things up to like the death of a family member or the death of a spouse, a divorce, all kinds of events that are called the big stressors in the human condition. But again, when you come back from the perspective that the unconscious mind is just going to come up from time to time, it's not really the event in time and space, or it's not the situation that's causing the darkness. The darkness is being caused from the unconscious mind. It's just coming and breaking into awareness, and then the situation is perceived to be, I have a stressful relationship, or I have a stressful job, or I live in a part of the world that's next to a live, active volcano, and it seems like that's stressful. Just the plumes of smoke coming can bring up all kinds of intense stress, but it's not what could occur or what seems to be happening that's causing the stress or the trauma. It's just the unconscious mind is causing it, and then the mind is interpreting everything in terms of the world, in terms of causation. And even little children grow up with telling a sibling, "You make me mad, you hurt my feelings." It's part of the language and the lingo, which is just the lingo of abuse. It's the lingo of mistreatment. It's the lingo of I've been completely mistreated or violated, and it seems like the violation is occurring on a personal level, when actually, again, it's just the darkness coming up for release. And so it takes a while to start to realize that, and once you start to orient into that, you start to realize, oh, this is how my awakening's going to go. I'm going to have this darkness coming up, and I'm going to be tempted to think that there's someone causing it or something that's causing it. And then you try to change the form, and it may offer some sense of temporary relief, But that's what all defense mechanisms do that the ego has invented. They are attempts to minimize fear while still maintaining the fear. So that's why the psychological defense mechanisms, it's kind of a house of mirrors, because sometimes you seem to have some success at going past these defense mechanisms, but they're really just protecting the mind from this direct exposure to the unconscious darkness. That's what they're doing. So they're like delaying the inevitable, and the inevitable is that it's going to come up, and you're going to have to face it, and you're going to have to release it, and yet it's not always seen that way. So here with spiritual community, it can seem at times and during certain days as a pressure cooker, because it's like what is going on? You can almost start to feel like you're a little bit disoriented. And the temptation will always be, if someone acted differently, if somebody spoke differently, if somebody behaved in some kind of different way, that there would be peace of mind. So it's always looking to make the adjustment in a way that will change the form to bring about a relief. When the television was first invented, I know that there was a lot of broadcasting difficulties. So people bought their television sets, they tuned in. There weren't that many programs. It wasn't like now with cable and multiple channels. We have hundreds or if not thousands of choices. They would have the rare broadcast, and when everyone would tune in. And then if it was hazy, fuzzy, if it had lines through it or whatever, people would inevitably go up, and if they had an antenna, they would start playing with the antenna. If they didn't have an antenna, they would start banging on the box. And that's just an extreme example of here. And the guy would come on as people were banging on the box and say, the problem is not in your set. Do not touch your dial. Like, keep your hands off of this primitive box, because it's a broadcasting problem and it has nothing to do with the receiving mechanism. So if you think of your mind as kind of the broadcasting mechanism, and the unconscious it's broadcasting the world that you perceive, that's a good metaphor. And Jesus is saying that this false self-concept has two parts. One is the dream that you dream in secret, which is the unconscious mind, and then the other part is the dream that you gave away, as if you have nothing to do with it now. It's just the world's just happening to you. How's your day going? Oh, bad day, very bad day, because of this. This happened to me, then this, and then, that was just in the morning, then the afternoon, this, and then just when I got to the evening, then that, and that, and that. It's as if events, circumstances, situation, people are coming at you as a person, as an individual, and what all that persona is hiding is it's a mask over the unconscious, what's going on, which is like a cauldron. It's kind of like a witch's brew, but it's worse than a witch's brew because it's an unconscious witch's brew. And there's nothing more terrifying than feeling like you have no control over your state of mind, that you are at the mercy of something that you have no control over whatsoever. So what Jesus is saying is, with much mind training, you can regain and empower your mind to start to realize that you can bring up, and you do bring up lots of things that you can release, and then through this process of forgiveness, then you see the world differently, and you actually become fully conscious or fully aware, and that's when the peace comes. When you're partially aware, it's no peace. When you're fully aware, the peace is there. And it makes sense that if you still had things that you were keeping out of awareness, that when those come in, if you know your only function is to let them move through and release them, then that seems to accelerate the process. To the sleeping mind, that is not a natural process. To the sleeping mind, projection is natural, denial is natural, repression is natural. You see how twisted things are, that the things that are really the most unhelpful are actually now accepted as, oh, that's just part of being human. Of course I'm in denial. Of course I repress at times. Of course I project and blame. And that's like the default program. And then there has to be a way to dismantle the default program. And spiritual community is one way that the Spirit can use perception to bring about this healing. So I think with having said all of that, I would like to show this episode. I think it's about a 45-minute episode, Star Trek Next Generation, and you'll see as it moves along that just like Elizabeth Kubler-Ross says, when you face death really closely, you go through these 5 stages, and she became kind of well known for the 5 stages of facing death. We're going to see Dr. Crusher go through a lot of things, and the value of seeing it in a Star Trek episode is you can really see it pretty clearly that something's happening to her, and she's perceiving things that she has no answer for, and even though she's the ship doctor, and she's supposed to by her role have answers. She's trained to come up with answers. She does not have answers for what's happening. It's totally perplexing to her. It's totally disorienting to her. And from what I've just been sharing, the underlying condition that's kind of shown in this episode is that feeling of feeling all alone in the universe. And all human beings have those moments of feeling completely alone, regardless whether they seem to be in a crowd or not. It's a psychological feeling of aloneness, like no one knows me. And in the sense of the human condition, yeah, that's how the ego set it up. And then when you make these attempts, like even with her, she has a son, Wesley, and she will have interactions with Wesley as well as her crew members. But it's a torturous thing when you start to have this feeling that you're extremely alone and you have no escape. You don't see a potential for escape. I think that's probably the feeling underneath a lot of suicides, when people just feel so disconnected and so alone, and they also feel like there's no solution. There's going to be no answer. There's no hope of a solution, and then suicide, the ego will come in and say, yes, it is hopeless. You might as well just kill yourself, and that's where that goes. But we conceive metaphysically that doesn't actually solve anything either. It's like just changing with the remote to another channel, and the same thoughts and beliefs that you have in your consciousness, when you seem to believe you could kill yourself, show up again. And they just keep showing up and showing up and showing up. I have a friend whose handle on his email at the bottom of the signature, his email signature is "Seriousness Causes Reincarnation." He's a long-time Course in Miracles friend. Seriousness causes reincarnation. In other words, it's guilt that draws the mind back into the form, into the playing things out. I remember when Svava was like 10 years old, and her cat was hit by a car, and she never really understood what her mother was trying to tell her and everything, but she went through this deep, dark feeling of being alone in the universe, and then was saying to God, "Can I die?" And then she went into this vast, vast mystical experience which was kind of a confirmation of the light. And then when she came back, at one point, her parents had taken the cat, kind of a kitten, away, so she never really had her chance to say goodbye. But she did see her grandmother, who had passed away before she was born, there. She'd just seen photos, petting the little kitten and just kind of saying, "It's I've got your kitten now. Your kitten's going to be all right." It was like a symbol, a vision of everything's going to be all right. And that's what we look to. We look to some kind of symbol as a symbol of hope, as a symbol that there's more, as a symbol that we can't die, the symbol that life continues on and on and on, like the theme from Titanic, "My heart goes on and on." So I'll just start this episode and pause a little bit from time to time, but you get the general context that Dr. Crusher's going to go through one of these existential moments where it feels like her whole world is starting to close in on her, literally, and her whole perception is like that, and then she has to really go inside to face things, because she doesn't have any easy answers for what's happening. So, so we could see with Beverly Crusher, she welcomes her dear old friend in. They're walking along after he's just come there. They're walking along the hallway, and basically he's telling his story of the loss of his wife, and he's basically saying it's just not the same. And then he goes all the way, rolling into, the hardest thing about growing old is this idea that the people that you love, the people that you've known are gone. So basically they're having a walk, and basically he's bringing up the belief and the thoughts of loss. And you can see her face. I don't know if you noticed her face when they zoomed in on it. It's kind of disillusioned, and it's really nothing more than what Jesus calls an opportunity for true empathy, because basically what he's teaching us through all this mind training, through A Course in Miracles, and all of his teachings from 2,000 years and since have been, you can't wake up from a dream of loss and sickness and death until you train your mind to stay in your mind with what's real and true. What's real and true is what God created. What's real and true is what God gave you in your origin, as your creation, to being a holy child of God. So what we're seeing there is her first opportunity to be in true empathy. And of course, Jesus, when he was here 2,000 years ago, that's really what his 30-some years on the planet was about coming to true empathy, which is just coming to with what's real and true, like I am as God created me, I and the Father are one. Before Abraham was, I am. That eternal nature that was coming through and being expressed as the Christ is the point of everything. It's actually the point of every single second that we experience with Earth, is simply to be who you are. And we've heard that, be the real you, but the real you isn't really a personality you, it's a spiritual you. It's an eternal you, and the temptation is to believe in the ego and its thought system, and to teach and learn that you're tiny, that you're weak, that you're frail, that you're vulnerable, that you're less than, that you're not enough, all forms of unworthiness. And when we say unworthiness, it's unworthiness of being the light. That's why it takes so much mind training to start to realize that it's like a hologram of projected thoughts, and the observer of the hologram is really the only place to go. It's like the dreamer of the dream is the only safe spot in your mind. Because as long as you're identified with any part of the hologram, you believe in the whole hologram and you interact with it as if you're a part of it. And until you get far enough back to just see it for what it is, then it's the human condition. And there seems to be no way out. It's such a realistic hologram. You know, you experience it prior to birth and then all the way through. And even when people seem to die, sometimes they feel they're going through a tunnel or they're viewing the world from a different angle or whatever, but the hologram goes on. Even when you die, you get death visions. and Jesus is saying they're all the same. All visions, all dreams in the world are all the same. So we see that's the predicament, and that's the most basic way of seeing that is for Beverly Crusher to see this Dalen show up, and then he's talking about loss and the sadness of the loss, and her face is representing like this idea, like I hear you, I hear what you're saying. And she even says that her and her partner had much shorter time together, and she's agreeing with him. Like, oh, I can see what you're talking about, and I experienced a little bit of that. But we never experience just a little bit. We take the whole thing. We either experience the hologram is real, or we see that it's not real. There's really no in between. That's why the first lesson of A Course in Miracles is nothing I see means anything. Jesus isn't wasting any time. He's not taking us into the kiddie pool so we can splash our toes around in the kiddie pool a little before we dive into the pool. He's starting off with the deep end. Lesson number 1, nothing I see means anything. Number 2, I have given everything I see all the meaning that it has for me. It's a private world. I'm just perceiving a private world. And the value of this episode is to help us start to remember that. Remember that we're looking at a private world, that the characters don't have thoughts of their own. The characters are thoughts. The scenes, don't have external meaning. They are projected. All the meaning in the scenario is coming from the mind and being projected. That's such a deep lesson, but these kind of episodes at Star Trek, this is one of our classic kind of teaching devices because it helps us come back, remember me in a deeper way. So, in this world, I know over the past decade and a half, people have done studies and they're saying there's this thing called disinformation or misinformation, conspiracy theories. Jason always said when you were growing up with your dad, you were exposed to some conspiracy theories, and now with Facebook and the internet, that seems to be like a major thing, misinformation. People, it's like every person on earth seems to have a different belief system, and politically, environmentally, as far as the core values and everything, when you turn on the news, people are just saying, I can hardly believe it. It's just getting wilder and wilder. The conspiracy theories have run amok. Like, there's been conspiracy theories. Did the United States send a man to the moon, or was that just a hoax acted out? But I watched a movie recently which was just showing the multiplication. It's just multiplying and multiplying and multiplying in our seeming lifetimes. It's just where people can't tell whether what they're reading on Facebook is true or not. They have to run fact checks on things. So it's the old thing is seeing, believing. Now people are starting to say, well, just because I saw it, just because I heard it, is it actually real, or is it just some kind of a fabrication or hoax? And you can see this going on with Dr. Crusher. She is looking to the five senses. She's looking to the characters that she's familiar with to corroborate, to reinforce what she believes is the truth. But it seems like, as she just goes along, that it's just one unexplained event after the next. And the first one baffled her when Quaylen was gone. Then she was like, wait a minute, I'm supposed to be visiting him in his quarters, and he's not here. And then you can see the projections, run a diagnostic on this one. What's wrong with their memory? I examined myself since I'm the only doctor. Now she's taking on what they were feeding back to her on a big ship. I'm the only doctor. My staff is gone. And then she says how big the ship is. Nope, there's only 200 and some. So, but what this is all showing is that the world that you perceive is exactly what you put in it, exactly what you gave to it. It can't be corroborated by any of the characters that are in there because you put them there. You see, the ego used the mind's power, the God-given power, and it generated a completely false projection. And then in that false projection, it made these characters that would seem to offer some semblance of agreement. Like, is it a sunny day or a rainy day? Well, right now the sun is shining, or the sky is blue, or blue with clouds, and so on and so forth. So it's constant, the mind is constantly seeming to looking as a character to other characters to say, is it so? Is it so? Is it so? And the lessons of A Course in Miracles are teaching the mind, retraining the mind that this world is a motion picture of consciousness. And it has not left the mind that thought it. In other words, in heaven, Jesus says, ideas leave not their source. That's a central teaching from A Course in Miracles. And with regard to heaven, it means that Christ is a perfect idea in the mind of God. Ideas, Christ, leave not their source. That's why Jesus said, I and the Father are one. I and our Father, we are the same Spirit. We're still in heaven. I and the Father. He recognized, he got past this hologram, and he realized, oh my gosh, I'm still as God created me, and death isn't real, sin isn't real, pain isn't real, suffering isn't real, division isn't real, conflict isn't real. None of those things are real because God didn't create them. And then he would say things like, our kingdom is not of this world. Yeah, that's right. It's a spiritual kingdom. And even though the Alphaeus twins and different apostles were like trying to get closer because they were thinking, this guy, it seems like he is very close to God. And they've seen some miracles, so they wanted to have high positions because they still were thinking that Jesus would rule the world in some kind of an earthly way, and they wanted to be close. They wanted to have good positions. Be close to this guy. Maybe I'll get a good position, but he was teaching that our kingdom is a spiritual kingdom, and that's why they couldn't make any sense. Even toward the end of his life, Judas was really in despair because in his mind, he was thinking, you could just wipe out the Romans with one swipe of your hand. You're the Son of God. You should have no problem with Romans or Pharisees. Unleash your power. And then when Jesus kept on with, my kingdom is not of this world, and then went through the crucifixion scene, then if Judas was already dismayed, he was more dismayed by what he was seeing, because he was like, why aren't you using your power to set things right in a worldly way? But the problem was that within the hologram, you can't set things right, because everything in the hologram is a projection of the mind. And ideas leave not their source. Jesus is teaching us through the workbook, my thoughts are images I have made. He's bringing together the thoughts we think, and the world we think we perceive. And he's saying it's all a hallucination that's going on in your mind. And you can't escape it until you realize that you can't judge it. By judging it is how you stay stuck in the hologram. And that's why he said, judge not lest ye be judged, because when you judge the hologram, you identify yourself as part of the hologram. When you see you can't judge the hologram, you realize you were never part of the hologram. You were spirit, always have been, always will be. So the lessons get closer and closer. For her, you can see she was started off pretty cheerful until she was walking along with Quaylen, and basically he was giving her his loss story, old and lost, and you could see her face get very sad because she was believing in it. And now with her son Wesley doing his, you see he was kind of rushed in his experiment. Come on, Wesley, hurry up! You're doing a warp field experiment, and you've got LeVar Burton screaming, "Come on, Wesley! Come on, hurry up!" So there's the flash, and then suddenly there is no mom. We could see that in the scene. Mom disappears when the flash happens. So we'll keep hanging with it here, but you can see emotionally, you can see it on her face, the tenseness is starting to rise, because the mind has asked a question that was never asked in heaven, and the question is, what am I? So that's the one question underneath this world. Christ doesn't ask, what am I? Because Christ knows. I am as God created me. I am one with my heavenly creator. But the mind that asks the first question, and not only that, she seems to have a self-concept as a doctor. And doctors are the ones that are supposed to diagnose and provide the solutions and the answers to get people well, to heal people. So that's a tricky self-concept when you think your definition of yourself is a healer. And now you can't seem to answer any of the questions or even come up with a sensible thing to say. Why is this happening? Why is that happening? You see how the predicament. That's why I played that song at the beginning. Without forgiveness, I will still be blind. Without forgiveness, I will still be hallucinating. Without forgiveness, I will still be believing the characters have minds of their own and thoughts of their own and speak words of their own. I'll still believe in individuality. Even the word collective, by the end of this episode, will have a different meaning for you, because collective kind of implies a group mind. And there is no group mind. There's only one of us. There's only one mind asleep and dreaming, but it's a sneaky ploy to keep the mind from knowing what it truly is. Look at her face, disbelief. This is actually really showing what is one of the most difficult parts of spiritual awakening. And I know a lot of you have gone through that with your families and friends. If you've had families and friends and you start to have insights and you start to have experiences, and then you think, I should be able to explain this to them. And when you try to explain it, they just look at you. What are you on about? But this is showing us that it's our perception that's shifting. And the most difficult thing is still when the mind is grasping. She's going around, she's naming the characteristics, the names of the crew in great detail, because they're still familiar, those fragments of memory in her mind. And it's just reminds me too, like when in this world, when people have family members that are diagnosed with dementia or Alzheimer's, sometimes they'll go to the nursing home where they are, and they just come out of there with the most horrific look on their face, like they don't remember me, they didn't recognize me. It's like their whole world, their whole perceptual world starts teetering, because it's like, oh my gosh, I've known this person for so many years. We have all these shared memories. And now it's as if it's gone completely and it's wiped away with nothing. There's nothing there in its place. It's the same incredulous look as that. And what Jesus is teaching us in the Course is only the thoughts of God can be shared. Nothing can actually be shared among the images. You can believe you share bodies. You can believe you share a bank account. You can believe you share a house. You can believe you share a family. But it's all a projection of the ego. So it's all, to use the acronym, false evidence appearing real. Fear. False evidence appearing real. So it's as if it's there. And she's like saying, I delivered babies. Now I can remember them. I can remember their faces, but nobody else remembers the babies, and nobody remembers the crew. And this is the most frightening thing as you begin to wake up, is that you start to get in touch with the power of your mind and the power of thought, and then through the mind training of A Course in Miracles, you start to have this idea like, oh, nobody is doing anything to me. My mind is doing it all to itself. And Jesus does come out and says that. He says, the secret of salvation is but this: you are doing this to yourself. Not personally, but mind. It's a mind trip. It's a dream of separation. It's a dream of differences. And then little by little, you start to take a closer look. And you start to think, wow, that's amazing to think that that's my mind. In lesson 132 of the workbook, Jesus says, there is no world apart from what you think. So he starts off with, there is no world apart from what you think. So he's just teaching that the world is a world of thoughts. And the good news is you can change your mind about these thoughts. You can forgive them. You can release these erroneous thought forms that you once believed were real. You can start to see them as the past. You can let your mind go. But it actually gets quite disorienting when you're looking at the world and you start to realize this is all thoughts that I'm holding to in my mind. Like people are just, not really people, but they're representing something that I still believe in, and it starts to get painful when you're holding on to and believing into something from the past. And Jesus is teaching us, the Holy Spirit answered this whole thing in an instant, and basically you just have to now start opening to the answer. Well, how do I open to the answer? Yeah, prayerfully, intuitively. It's the holy instant, and you can't reach it by preparing for it and planning for it. You just have to pray for it. You have to desire it. And that's also helpful when you start to see the underlying dynamics, because then it gets easier and easier to forgive. Forgive is just releasing the past. Forgive is just to release the grievance, release the opinion. Jesus taught that in the Sermon on the Mount, judge not, lest you be judged. He's saying, if you continue to hold on to these judgments, you will torture your mind by holding on to these judgments. God didn't create these judgments. And that's why when people take a stance and continue to see just the real Jesus as the historical Jesus, as just a man who lived 2,000 years ago, then it's easy to develop a pride in that image. And Jesus is the only way, and going around putting down everybody and everything else. Oh, Jesus is, and it's like you have a personal belief in this image that existed 2,000 years ago, and the Christ is not that image. Even in A Course in Miracles, it comes out and it says, who is Jesus Christ? And it says, the man was an illusion. Well, what a book. What? Imagine trying to tell a Christian, well, the man was an illusion. Now, it's like, heathen, atheist, get out of my face. You can see because there's such a strong belief in time. There's such a strong belief in the linear progression of images. But really, that's just a symbol of a love not of this world. It's a symbol of a light not of this world, that this whole world is a veil drawn over the face of Christ, the actual Christ. So you can see where it's going. She still has not had a symbol, and she's taken whenever it's, am I crazy? Do you think I'm crazy? And even Counselor Troy was saying, no, it's don't take it so seriously. The worst that can happen is we end up late where we're going. And she's like saying, but wait a minute, we're missing 900 and some people. That seems to be an issue. But when things start to disappear, and when people even start to, in your spiritual awakening, when people start to disappear from your life, that's not a time for grief. That's not a time for sadness and lamenting. It's just you start to see, in that workbook lesson, my capital self is ruler of the universe. Jesus says, what happens is what I desire, and what does not occur is what I do not want to happen. Wow, if you just had to believe one sentence from A Course in Miracles, wouldn't that be the best sentence to believe in? What happens is what I desire, and what does not occur is what I do not want to happen. Because if you just believe that one sentence, you would pay close attention about what you desire. Do I desire war? What's going on over there in Ukraine? What does my mind have to do with the war in Ukraine? A lot, actually. A lot. If you believe in war, you see it. If you believe it, you perceive it. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. And then, when you don't believe it anymore, oh wow, things just light up. Jesus wasn't witnessing a body hanging on a cross, bleeding to death. His perception was so bright that basically the whole world lit up, and that's why he could say things like, "Forgive them, for they know not what they do," because he knew that the them weren't real. That makes a lot of difference if you see the them are real, and you see the Romans and the Sadducees and all these different groups that are battling with each other, and then you go beyond that. So ultimately, even the Gnostics, after Jesus passed away and the apostles, the next kind of group that we have in history that were kind of close. I mean, the Essenes were already there before Jesus, came on the scene. But the Gnostics, I don't know if any of you have read anything about the Gnostics, but they believed in reaching God through knowing, through knowledge. That was their pathway to God. And the Gnostics always said in the first century, right after Jesus, they said, well, what happened on Calvary, the cross and the blood and the dying and the vinegar, and they said no. They said Jesus was actually on another hill laughing. This is what the Gnostics, they must have been a really cool group to be around. You imagine that, you see how different that is from Catholicism, right? For example, the Gnostics were really close. They said, no, Jesus was off on another hill just laughing at the whole scene. That's what the Gnostics wrote in the first century. They were pretty close to Jesus, what he went through. They were pretty close. And Gnosticism, when you look at the Gnostics' teachings, they say the world was an illusion. It was a projection of a demigod, they called it. They had their own word for ego back in the first century. Jesus laughing and the demigod was what made this world. And it's not a real world. But they didn't have the full awareness of the Christ, because when they talk, they knew that they've all these human vices for food and sex and all these kind of crazy cravings. But the Gnostics said, it's not real. None of it is real. So we're going to indulge in all the vices. Sweet. We're going to indulge in all the vices to prove that they're not real, but it didn't work. You see, Jesus has more teachings on pleasure and pain in the Course, saying that, you can't have one without the other. It's impossible to believe in pleasure without finding pain, he says in the Course, which is something the Gnostics could have used, because they were going to try to do all the vices of the human race to prove that the world wasn't real, and they still seem to die because they didn't quite understand the full strength of what the Christ was teaching. But now with the Course, we've got the whole package. We don't have to just leave it at he's laughing on another hill. We know he knows the hill's not real. He knows the body's not real. He didn't experience pain. He was experiencing all this love and light from his union with the Creator. And then the ego interprets, the crucifixion, the pain, the suffering, and thus we have, not just in Christianity, but we have in lots of religions, pain and suffering, and somehow that's part of it. I mean, I still hear people say, you wouldn't know the glory and the love if you didn't know the pain. And Jesus is like, what? What does pain have to do with love? Love is prior to pain and pleasure. Love is prior to the tricks of time. Love has nothing to do with the timeline. Before Abraham was, I am. So here we go. You can only imagine what's going to happen, what our next scene's going to be, because she's now talking to him, and he's saying, even if you do believe in such a thing as a crew, for him it's quite apparent. He's just reflecting. It's just us, and it's always just been us. Nothing different. And she's just got the look like, what is happening? Well, Jesus says, what you believe, you make real for you. He doesn't say what you believe, you make real in reality, in heaven. But he says, what you believe, you make real for you. Meaning, by believing it, you give it a sense of reality. It's just like Walt Disney, one day he starts drawing a mouse, and then he draws another mouse and another mouse, and he starts drawing lots of mouses. And when you put those mouses together, like in a little page, and you flick the pages, it looks like animation. It looks like the mouse comes to life. If you flick the pages of the drawings of the mouse, they're just static images. But if you flick them, you see how that's what we have. Cartoons. That's how animation was made. And what he's basically saying here is you have very narrow beliefs of time and space and thought. You don't really understand what thought is. Jesus is teaching us about our thoughts and the power of our mind. But the mind is fallen asleep. It's so afraid of God. It's so afraid of the mind. It's so afraid of thought that it now has made up an image that it calls alive. And this image has a brain, gray matter. You see how terrified that the mind is of the mind. It's now made a little image with gray matter that it calls a brain. And in the cartoon of time and space, it seems like the brain thinks. There's a lot of neurologists that would say, yeah, that's what we're working with, neurons firing in the brain. Joe Dispenza, but that's still not the mind. That's not the mind, because the mind is beyond the cosmos. It's made up the cosmos. The mind contains the cosmos, even though the scientists are saying, wow, it's big, it's gigantic. We still are discovering new galaxies. It's bigger than we thought. and it's still all in the mind. So this is now an interjection of this traveler is like a witness of, you need to just think about this whole thing in a different way. Because the way you're thinking about it is still going, you see how sad Wesley was. I've lost her. I lost Mom in his experiment. And he was asking for the traveler to come, but he said the traveler was so far away, but now the traveler has shown up. And he's just saying, your perception is very limited. You have to start to think differently. Okay, those last lines are a summary of the whole Course in Miracles. Jesus says the same thing in the Course. He said, I can't come into your dream and rescue you because you're me. And if I interfered between your thoughts and their effects, I would be tampering with the most basic law of cause and effect in the world. You cannot interfere between the Christ's thoughts, the thoughts that the Christ mind is thinking, and the perceptions, the effects of those things. But he does say the same thing there, like the traveler, but I can help. I can show you the conditions in your mind. If you follow my instructions, I can show you the conditions in which creation or reality can return to your awareness. But he's basically saying, if I intervened between, just like the traveler's saying, between your thoughts and their effects, that would be an interference that would just be proving that the eternal Christ is helpless. You see, if there has to be a savior, a helper outside of the mind, then that's proving that the Christ is helpless. But the Christ isn't helpless. So that's why it's called self-realization, or like Mazo called it, self-actualization. You can't have anything or anyone do it for you. You know, even though that's a common belief in Christianity, is that Jesus is the Messiah, is the Savior, and all I have to do is believe in Jesus, and I'm saved too. And those poor bastards that don't believe in Jesus, well, they're going to burn in hell. You know, and the traveler would come and go, no, you got it so tiny there. That is not it. That is not it. And basically, we'll see what he does here. But we know what Jesus is doing with the Course is he's saying, you just need instruction. And when I give you instruction, that's what I and the Holy Spirit are here for, just to instruct your mind. And all you have to do is follow the instructions. But that's no small thing either, because a lot of us have had intuitions and nudges our whole life. Whether we follow them or not, we've got some other voice in our mind going, are you crazy? Go for the money, go for the fame, go for the glory, go for physical immortality, do rebirthing and become physically immortal. Jesus knows none of those things are actually helpful because they all reinforce a body identity. But let's see what happens here with the traveler. So you can see it start to cave in, that sense of aloneness, that sense of I'm all alone in the universe. Eric, what's that song you had? It's only me. What's the chorus of that song? Oh, they're like Beverly. It's only me. That's it. That's the only line he can remember now. The rest of the chorus is gone. The first word of the song, he's like, it's gone. It's only me. But I remember when you sing that, but it's only me, you really get emotional. But you're singing about the me that's the mind. And you can see she's still identified with the Beverly Crusher doctor character. So she's like run diagnostics. She's really trying to use the analytical scientific approach to find it. And in the end, we do have to abandon that, because the answer is intuitive. All the answers are within. Like Jesus says in the Course, there are many answers you have received but have not heard. They've all but landed. Within us is every single answer to every single potential problem. That's a comforting thing. The real question is, how willing am I to hear those answers? Because those answers are instructions into the holy instant, back into the I amness prior to time. So it's already there. So when we say, I have all the answers, I just want to be aware of them, we're really praying to be shown, just to be shown, to be instructed. And that's why I think the Course came as a course in miracles, as a self-study book, because even that's just a symbol for a mind that believes it's a person to read, to practice lessons, and go deeper and deeper and deeper. Okay. So this is very symbolic. This is kind of what happens when you go deeper, because the bubble is your self-concept. Self-concept is not the personality self. That's way too tiny. The whole cosmos is the mask over the face of Christ. The whole cosmos. And the more that you pray to know the truth, you shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. Knock, he said in the Bible, and the door shall be opened. So it's not necessarily like a shrinking, but it is, I'll say it is like a dismantling. What do we have in our movie collection? We have so many dismantling movies, but there's one that's not that old with Dustin Hoffman and Lily Tomlin, I Heart Huckabees. Has anybody ever seen I Heart Huckabees? That's a movie where Lily Tomlin and Dustin Hoffman play existential detectives. And people come to them because they want to have their world dismantled. So this is a movie. It's quite comical. And they are working to dismantle the self-concept, because one of the characters, the main character, comes in to see Dustin Hoffman, and he gets out a blanket, and he said, just imagine that everything that you know about the world is in this blanket. And the guy says, what's outside of the blanket? And Dustin Hoffman, the existential detective, said, more blankets. It's just all blankets. And he's basically, Dustin Hoffman tells him, he says, everything that you could ever want, you already have and are. That's what the existential detective, and everything that you could ever want, you already have and are. So then the movie goes on, and it's a dismantling, but at some point during the dismantling, when everything starts to collapse and fall apart, another character appears, and it's this French woman, and she is trying to convince the clients that that they should just give in to the world. And this woman has the characters, when they're afraid of the existential detective, so they run away from the existential detective. So they're afraid of losing their self-concept. They go over there, and she gets them to recite after her, creation, destruction, creation, destruction. That's all she says to them. She's trying to associate creation with destruction, because she's playing the ego character. When you start to go through the shrinkage or the dismantling, the ego will come in and go, just give in to the existential nature of the world. You're going to die, destruction, die, death. You see, it's a death wish. Of course it's going to try to keep us from following the intuitive voice. Of course it doesn't want us to see that it's a construct. But here she is, and she's still using her diagnostic mind, but she's basically the computer saying that sphere is the entirety of the universe, which is really a reflection of everything I perceive is, the universe I perceive is what I believe in. And there are even physicists who believe the cosmos is contracting. But what it actually is this sense of reaching the point of surrender, where you have to start to realize that there's no way out with the thinking that you've been using. You need a higher order of thinking. Forgiveness must be a higher order of thinking. Without forgiveness, I will still be blind. There must be a higher order that will take over when I relinquish the linear egoic, because my real self is still there. The Holy Spirit's still there. The Holy Spirit's always there. So it's like, what's that song that Olivia Newton-John? She passed away recently, but come take my hand, you should know me. I've always been in your mind. You know I will be kind. I'll be guiding you. From where I stand, we are home free. The planets align so rare. There's promise in the air because I'm guiding you. And the song is magic. I always put miracle in there. Have to believe in the miracle. Nothing can stand in our way. You have to believe in the miracle. Don't let your aim ever stray. And live by your heart survive. Destiny will arrive and bring all your dreams alive for you. Bring your happy dream alive. You know, even in that, it comes through the songs. It's coming through all directions to us. It's saying, wake up, wake up. You don't have to believe in the fear. You don't have to believe in the guilt. You don't have to believe in the darkness. You can believe in the light. You know, you can believe in the light. That's one of the workbook lessons. I am the light of the world. That is my only function. That is why I'm here. So here we go. She's just watching this, though, and she's seeing even her ship is, her universe is getting smaller and smaller. So in this show, it was the light that she was always trying to cling to anything to avoid getting sucked into the vortex, and then she just goes and finally realizes that's like a portal of stabilization, and she leaps into the light. And really that's what is a stable of portalization in terms of our practice of forgiveness. Is Jesus says that only a single intent, only one purpose, a single intent can endow events with stable meaning. That when our perception is fragmented, it's because we want conflicting things. And when we start to focus our mind on forgiveness, we start to practice with everything during the day. There's nothing too small or too large to practice with. It can be anything you can practice with. What's my purpose? And Jesus does say that in the Course. He says there's one question that you can safely ask with anything. What is it for? What is it for? What is the purpose? And then you go deeper and deeper into the state of forgiveness, because you have a purpose given you by the Holy Spirit to practice, to transfer the training, and to cease kind of fragmenting and compartmentalizing everything. Because when you compartmentalize the world, then Jesus says everyone who comes here orders their own, believes they can order their own thoughts, and tries to organize their perception based on their preferences and their value system. And the only thing is, there is no preference system or value system that's better than the next. They're all equally holographic. They all keep you in the perception of time and space, but forgiveness doesn't. Forgiveness frees the mind. So that's why Jesus said, you shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. So that's how we relate this to what seems to be our daily life. Whatever we're going through, whether we're building something or constructing something, doing something, serving something, going out for dinner, doing anything, there is a purpose that unifies perception. And that's like that stabilizing link that they were looking for and she was looking for at the end, which turned out to be the vortex. She was always avoiding it, but she dove into it in the end, and then she came through. We're not wanting to go to a different part of the universe through a vortex or a wormhole. We're actually wanting to go beyond the universe. So there it is. Okay, we'll open it up for practical application. Let's bring it down to practical application. You can see how it would apply to a lot of things in your mind. Anything really.
Yeah, I really liked what stood out for me more, like, you're always saying, like, it's not personal or whatever, awakening, and you said personality self's not the self concept, but the whole universe. And it, like, hit me on such a deeper level, like, what a distraction it is to, like, come somewhere or go somewhere for my own healing. But, like, why here? It's like, what serves the whole? I don't know, it just really struck me, because it's like, what serves in the moment for everybody, so to speak, is what serves the healing of the mind. And it's like so much more relaxing than what do I think I need for my healing. Actually, what a distraction that is. So
yeah, yeah, it kind of dispels the ego idea that if I as a body was in somewhere else, if I was somewhere else, I'd be happy. And this feeling that you go deeper into looking and praying to look past the form, show me the real you. Like, we have so many good movies, but there was one movie in our collection called Three Wishes, and in the movie, the dog is actually the Holy Spirit character. And the little boy, every time he's around this dog, these spectacular, wondrous things happen, almost like fireworks and transported and everything. And then at one point in the movie, the little boy is just staring into the dog's eyes, and he says, "Show me who you really are." The boy has this strong prayer, and then the dog disappears, and it's all these lights in the sky, fireworks, and it's like fireworks at an amusement park. Was all this light behind the dog, and I think that is the great temptation of the ego, to always think if something would change, I'd be happier, or if I was somewhere else, I'd be happier, because then it sets up goals. And the goals are all based on preferences. And Jesus is really coming to our mind to say, you are everything, you are everyone. He's trying to draw us into this sense of everythingness. He's trying to take us beyond this local kind of time-space definition of being a point in time to being beyond the whole thing. And when I came back to the monastery after my last trip, there was a couple envelopes waiting for me, and from my friend Dale Crow. And Dale Crow was a former, some of you know the story, he was a boxer who was on ESPN, and he's a big heavyweight boxer, I think, and he murdered a man named Frank, and he was thrown in prison for many, many years, and then when he was in prison, he discovered my books, he discovered the Course, and he started corresponding with me from prison. So these last two, first he was writing it out in like red ink, handwritten, but these last two were typed. They were both sent on the same day, two different journal entries, two different envelopes, and I was reading through them, and he said, I'm starting to get a glimpse of what you mean by I am everywhere. Because his first recognition was because I think he's been in there for 18, 20 some years. He's been in prison for this murder. And now he's been working with the Course, working with the teachings. And he said first he had to realize that there wasn't a physical prison. Imagine yourself sometimes in solitary confinement and all those. First, he said he had to go for the idea that it was a prison of the mind, which is really what Morpheus tells Neo in the Matrix, when Neo is saying, what is the Matrix? He says it's a prison for your mind. It's the world is you see has been drawn over your eyes to blind you from the truth, and it's a prison for your mind. So you see how practical the teachings can be if you're waking up every day with guilt. the guilt of, let's say, believing you murdered somebody. And you've got that guilt to wake up to every day. And then the step out of that is to start to realize, wait a minute, I'm just perceiving the prison of my own making. And the reason I'm perceiving the prison is because of the guilt that I feel in my mind. And slowly taking it in, okay, I think I feel guilty for murdering Frank, but I feel guilty for believing I separated from God. So there's a couple key points, is what is the source of my guilt? Not the projection, but what in my mind do I believe that's generating this guilt? And then he took it in deeper and deeper, because everything he was saying, some of the things that I first wrote to him in the first letter, he was kind of depressed at the time, and I kept sharing a few sentences, a few lines about just trusting and trusting. You will be carried there. He said, you kept saying, you will be carried there, carried there. So it was beautiful in these, because he's seen how that guilty thought has recycled in his mind, and he's starting to see that the guilt is what is keeping him in this feeling of being in prison. And then he starts to realize, even when he's applied for parole and he's made up the case for parole, when he's been denied parole, he's starting to realize, I still must want imprisonment. It's not like he's waiting for the people to let him out. He's starting to realize, I still must want imprisonment because I'm seeing this. And then little by little, he's realized that he's been moved 7 times in all these years. So he's seen 7 different prisons, I think, in the state of Ohio. And he's just been moved not too long ago to another one. He was developing a pretty big prison ministry. He was showing movies. He was bringing my teachings in. The prison started lighting up, and then maybe the warden or something, get him out of here. Let's move him to another. You see, he was using his mind to try to teach what he would learn. And then when he got moved, he was kind of depressed. And I think Jeffrey, who's my friend who goes in to see him, he said, well, there must be a blessing in this. There has to be a blessing in this movement. And so he was writing in these letters, he said, and I'm starting to open up to the blessing. Like, I chose this for my good. This isn't a bad thing that's happened. Because I know when Jeffrey talked to him, Jeffrey said, there you go, fresh start. He's like, like after everything I did, fresh start. But that's the whole point in starting to realize that, like Beverly Crusher said, I must be creating this reality. Jesus teaches us that creation is way beyond form. So, but the recognizing, I'm doing this to myself. There's a workbook lesson in the Course for that. It's, I have invented the world I see. You see, Jesus takes one lesson. I have invented the world I see. Before I can let it go, I have to first acknowledge that I invented it. Like in 12 steps, somebody has to acknowledge that they have a drinking problem or a drug problem or a sex problem before they can go through the steps to healing. They have to first acknowledge the issue. If they deny the issue, if they go to the 12-step meetings, I don't have a problem. You all have a problem. I don't have a problem. I don't even want to be here. You people, it's not going to work. It's not going to work because the problem hasn't been acknowledged first. And then the prayer underneath would be to help me. I have an issue and I need help. And then that's what makes the 12 steps work. You can just go through the steps. So you can kind of see it with Beverly Crusher, because she was always running diagnostics. She was running from her doctor mentality diagnostic. She was trying to solve it. And then you just saw the look on her face. I was there in engineering and with the bubble. I'm in the bubble. That's the first kind of step. My mind is in a bubble. And not a person in a bubble, but my mind's in the bubble. And then from that point, I'm perceiving a bubble of a world that seems to be gigantic, but I made it up. I invented it, so I must be able to release it or uninvent it somehow. There has to be a correction. If there was no correction, then sin would be real. Then sin would be, when you talk to many Christians, that's the one thing. If you say sin isn't real, oh, that seems to be the biggest blasphemy. But what Jesus is saying, he's saying, sin is actually a very arrogant idea because God created you whole and complete and perfect, and to believe in sin is to believe the most arrogant idea you could ever, because it's to deny your creator. If sin was real, then creation would be a lie. Then heaven would be a lie if sin is real. You see, that's the flip. So, but even in Christianity, they have what they call the sinner's prayer, which is basically a prayer to ask for help from Jesus. It's first saying, I'm a sinner, and then it's asking for help. So you see, there's still an element in, I admit I have a problem and I need help. And that's what starts to set the mind in the right direction. Yeah.
I just feel a lot of tension. I think, this episode really brings me in touch of the fear of miscreating. When I was rushing towards the light, but in a not in a guided way, I went through these experiences where perception just really, really shifted. And where I was literally, so close to the light and so much fear, and then like everything in perception, whole scenes just shifted. It was so scary. And also, it's there was something that I knew as a child, the power of thought. I knew that, and I was so afraid of death. And I knew that if I thought too much of death, I could just create it. In my perception. And I know I found a gentle way now with Jesus in the Course, and not having that impatience of the goal-oriented thing anymore. But those memories are still there, the fear is still
Yeah, it's like in the episode where Beverly Crusher gets to that point, was like, I was there in engineering. I've seen this warp bubble before, like I've seen this energy field. And then her question is, what was I thinking? It's going back to the reeling it all back. What was I thinking? And then she thought about her friend, and then she thought about loss. She was able to go back to that moment, because even when she was walking with him down the corridor and he was telling her about losing his wife and losing all the ones, and her face was just so sad when she was hearing that, but she took it back forward to right when she was down there in engineering. What was I thinking? So it is a step, I think. That's what Jesus is doing through the Course, is he's helping us take away the veils of forgetfulness, and just bring it all the way back into our mind. What was I thinking? And then, even while he's taking this back to that point, he's like a cheerleader. He's cheering us on, reminding us, you never had the power. You never had the power to miscreate. Regardless of what you now perceive, God never gave you the power to miscreate. So in that sense, Jesus is like cheering us on, like a cheering force, reminding us over and over, you never had the power. He's telling us what we perceive through our five senses, seem to be lingering effects of something that has been corrected. He just keeps reminding us, you're still in the afterthought. You're still in the afterthought of that guilt, of that miscreation thought. And then, he's telling us too that if you remembered what heaven was like, you would weep. You would have tears of this uncontrollable joy of love. You would weep if you remembered how precious that love is and that memory. And yeah, it's interesting. I'm always looking for Saturday movies to show, always looking for another Saturday movie. And just last night, I'd watched this first movie, God's Not Dead, and then I watched the second movie, God's Not Dead. Then I signed up for this thing, Pureflix, and there's a third God's Not Dead and a fourth. So that's what I've been doing the last couple of days. Watching the third one, The Light in the Darkness is the name of that one. God's Not Dead, The Light in the Darkness. And then the last one is called We the People. So I was talking last night about those, and Sava said, you should do a whole month. You should take I said, maybe I could start in October on the Heralds of Eternity and run through 4 God's Not Dead movies. Because I'm always by the movie. I'm always singing along with the newsboys at the end of the movie anyway. God's not dead, he is surely alive. He's living on the inside, roaring like a lion. God's not dead, he's surely alive. Yeah. And so I thought, yeah, I think I could have some fun with those 4 movies in October. God's Not Dead revival. Which is good, because it's, with this world, there's either a strong belief in atheism, or there's a strong belief in a kind of a human God who gets angry, and he sees you when you're sleeping. He knows when you're awake. It's like Santa Claus. He knows when you've been bad or good, so be good for goodness sake. It's like, let's lift this up higher, and let's go to a deeper awareness of the presence of God's love, and let's do it that's one thing good about these movies. They really go for all the angles, like angles of choice and freedom and legal things and relationship things, and yeah, really, really well done. But that's just part of our gentle awakening. That's really what you're praying for. Is you're just saying, all right, Jesus, help me reinterpret this world. It's been done before because you did it, so you know the way. And then we're back to that: follow the guidance, be willing to really tune in and pray, and just listen and follow what the guidance is, and then the destination is assured. Yeah. And that's how we get past that. It's for most people, I would say, yeah, the fear of miscreation is pretty pushed out of awareness. They're more into trying to carve out their life and make a name for themselves and succeed and better themselves personally, and they're not in touch with the fear of miscreation. But that's definitely the unconscious mind. It's down there in the basement, and the door is pretty well sealed. Yeah. And those are just memories coming up, yeah.
Yeah.
Where you go way back and you feel that, oh yeah, I feel that still.
Yeah.
I remember this song I heard growing up, and it was, oops, I made a mistake. You're beautiful, beautiful. Oops, I made a mistake. You're beautiful to me. It was a very happy song because it's kind of like it's turning that belief in miscreation into an oops. And Jesus is like, yeah, it is an oops. And eventually it's an oops that never happened. But it takes a lot of listen, follow to get into to that. Yeah, so that's what we're here for.
Well, that's a good interpretation.
That's right.
Feels much lighter.
It is much lighter. Yeah, it is much lighter. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jeska. Beautiful.
Something you said, David, really struck me because I said the same thing this morning. I have a problem and I need help. And I think I only realized the extent to which I was the problem, and I have been the bottleneck in collaboration this whole time. I'm in this follower role in the kitchen, and the leader is here, Amelia, and when I first came, I thought, yeah, no problem, I can follow direction. It's not a big deal. But I didn't realize the depth of my authority problem, and also how conflicted my desires have been. Like, I have wanted connection and collaboration and to feel love and intimacy and a closeness with someone, with anyone, and yet when a lot of times my experience has been, when there's a difference in opinion, like two different viewpoints, this thing, the ego, it just roars up in me, and it's like this competitiveness that I never knew that I had. It just seems to conflict with all those desires that I just named. And yeah, I think I think just through this collaboration, I've never really collaborated this closely with anyone in my life, I think. And through this, I'm seeing just how competitive I've been. And I realize that I'm the bottleneck when I'm doing that. I'm trying to get my own way, and I'm trying to become the authority. And yesterday, Mita gave this really beautiful metaphor that I'm having in my mind and just contemplating this, is that I'm, as the follower, I am to be the wing, the wind or the air beneath her wings, to, propel the whole effort forward. And when I have this conflict in my mind, it just becomes like the storm in the air, and it's not able to create that momentum and that true collaboration. And I think just maybe yesterday when things seemed to blow up or boil over, or today, I started realizing like how much I guess I am the problem. And yeah, I felt really disappointed in myself. Like I thought like in 3 weeks it would get better, but maybe it was more exposed. The extent to which, how competitive I am, and how much of an authority problem I have, and how conflicting my desires are. And I just want to put this out on the altar and really, truly see everyone that I collaborate with as on the same side as me, like instead of as an opponent, so that we're working together instead of me trying to, creating this conflict in my mind. I just want to be like, like an arrow, both pointing in the same direction. I think this is my prayer, and yeah, I just wanted to express this and put this out there. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Bhavna. Yeah, I just listened to an audio reading of an article yesterday, but it's this beloved man named Richard Rohr, who's been amazing mystic over many, many years, many, many decades. But now he's in his 70s, and he said, I pray daily for at least one humiliation. And it struck me so funny. I pray daily for at least one. Lord, give me at least one humiliation today, every day. And humiliation, really, we can see what he's praying for is humbleness. Humiliation is actually funny because that's the ego's interpretation of humbleness is humiliation. But I thought it was funny because, he's a simple, living such a simple life as a hermit down in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and he's been diagnosed with cancer and some kind of skin thing going on, color, and then here he is, this sweet man with these sparkly eyes, praying for a daily humiliation. It just something struck me as wonderful about that, because you could see after all that he's been through, and he was a priest, and he formed a community in Cincinnati, Ohio, where I have my peace house. It was part of that community, the New Jerusalem community, and then he made another community out in New Mexico. But that really does flip things around when you start to see things that way. When your prayers are like that, instead of prayers for something good to happen in form, it's the prayer for the humbleness. And that's what I see when you started to look at, the problem here this is probably a good thing. I'm getting more exposed about the problem, and that's a good thing. And the ego doesn't understand that. It has lots of views of problems, but not exposing it. Yeah, that's real. Like you're advancing when you get into that humbleness. Just show me the way today. Yeah. So thank you. That's beautiful. That's the undoing of the authority problem. And if you're seeing Amelia as like the one that you're working with, and you're the wind beneath her wings, you can sing to her during the day. Did you ever know that you're my hero? You're everything I'd like to be. Now that's getting back into true empathy, seeing with the love. Yeah. I can fly higher than an eagle, 'cause I am the wind beneath your wings. Yeah, humbly. Yeah. Yeah. That's it. Well, I think that's good for today. A nice afternoon session. Yeah. Lovely, lovely. Yeah, what a blessing. I had not seen this one for quite some time, and then I was saying, well, it could be a episode coming in, and then Kirsten wrote and said, "That's Star Trek." So I was like, Star Trek. So I got my phone out, Plex, and then go to YouTube, and I kept hearing "remember." So remember me. Oh yes, remember me. That's the one. Yeah, yeah. Means and ends together. Yeah. In the most exquisite way, to start to see the bubble of time-space. The means and end are together. That's kind of what my friend Dale in prison was writing me in his letters. I think once or twice he kept saying, yes, and you remind me there's no one out there. Because when he's thinking of Frank, the man that he murdered, or he's thinking of, what's memories, just memories. It's just like, okay, my mind, my thoughts, right now. There's no one out there. Like, what am I feeling right now? If I'm not feeling joyful, am I willing to shift? To ask for help in shifting, even not even to shift, just to even ask for help. Help me shift this, and then, yeah. Because in that prison, he says, "Oh, I have plenty of time on my hands here to practice, to come back." And he's starting to even look at the roles, because he's such a big, strong guy. He usually gets put into leadership roles because people are afraid of him. And he was starting to question, do I really want that role? Do I want people to be afraid of me, What a precious thing to be in there, questioning even the roles that are given. Like, I don't have to see myself this way. I don't have to, even though it's a common thing that happens to him. So, to be like the big guy, the enforcer. I need to question that. That's it. Okay, well, thank you. Thank you for this intimate session today. I'm glad we could all go on this ride together with Captain Picard. Yeah, beautiful.